tolerated. Sure, Edward.
Yeah, thanks. Caroline, on the economy. So after mostly a down week last week in the economy, you've been very vocal as well as other cabinet members about how we're in a transition and about how this economic transition, and there's a long-term plan for tariffs on this. How concerned is the president that the markets and Americans, for lack of a better term, will freak out over these tariffs and be concerned about a long-term plan?
Sure. I think I've been asked this question and answered this question respectfully, Edward. We are in a period of transition. The president has made that clear. He also has made his belief in tariffs and what they will do for our great country clear, restoring wealth back to our country. And if you look at the president's first-term economic formula, massive deregulation, tax cuts, lowering the cost of living with an energy boom, which the American people can expect soon. Wall Street and Main Street should both be assured by what President Trump did in his first term. It's the exact same formula. In fact, I would argue it's even better this time around. And if you look at some of the economic indicators in the last week, the latest CPI report last week beat expectations. Inflation is cooling. Core inflation dropped for the first time in 4 months. The national average of the price of gas is down 42 cents from 1 year ago. And there was also a new report out this morning about wholesale egg prices. They continue to fall. A dozen eggs are now $3.10 cheaper since January 24th. First, that's a 47% decrease overall. So I think the American people do have great reason to be optimistic about this economy. And as I've said repeatedly, it continues to be true. The administration has a whole of government effort to fix the economic mess created by Biden.
So the president's pointing to that April 2nd tariff deadline, so to speak. Is the tariff back and forth sort of done now? We're just all looking towards April 2nd?
Well, I think the president would tell you that all options are always on the table, and he's always ready to respond if he feels the United States is being unfairly treated by our allies and also our competitors around the world. But yes, the April 2nd day is a big day for the country, as the president has said. Reciprocal tariffs will go into effect. We'll have more details on that as the date nears, but our entire trade team, Secretary Lutnick, Secretary Bessent, the vice president has been quite involved in these talks and discussions as well about what that will look like. And the president, as you always do, you will hear from him directly on it. Deborah Saunders, how are you?
Fine. How are you doing, Caroline?
Good, thanks.
Former pardon attorney Elizabeth Boyer believes she was fired for refusing to sign off on a move to restore gun rights to actor Mel Gibson. DOJ's Todd Blanche says no. But I want to know, is the administration dedicated to restoring gun rights to felons who served their times? I ask this because I've talked to people who were pardoned. They felt that was important. Of course, this isn't necessarily for a pardon. What is the president's thinking on this issue?
Sure.
After you've served your sentence, should you have gun rights?
It's an important question. It is one I have not spoken to the president about on his views, but I will take it to him this afternoon. I will tell him you asked, and we will get you an answer. You're welcome. Jonathan.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. A question for you regarding the administration complying with judges' orders. I want to ask about an administration spokesperson who's the border czar, Tom Homan. He was on Fox News.
We love Tom Homan.
And he was talking about the deportations, and he said the following. He said, "We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think," which seems to me, just reading that, that you don't care what orders come from the federal bench. Is that the case? Can you clarify that, please?
Well, I think since you just quoted Tom, I'll quote Tom. He said, "I don't care what the judges think, but I can assure you that the administration is complying with the court order. And as I've said repeatedly from this podium, all of the flights that were subject to the judge's written order departed before the written order, and we are prepared to make that case in court later this afternoon." Reagan.
And then if I could, on Russia, the president, as you pointed out, Caroline, made some remarks on Air Force One coming back from Florida, and he seemed to indicate that the conversation tomorrow concerns essentially dividing up assets, dividing up territory associated with the war in Ukraine. Has President Zelensky given President Trump that authority? Is that what is going to take place tomorrow?
Well, as you know, the president in His entire national security team have been engaged directly with President Zelensky and the Ukrainian team, and that has been part of the discussion between the president's team and the Ukrainians. As for where those lines will be drawn or any specifics, I am not going to get into that from this podium. It would be unwise for me to get ahead of the president's call with President Putin tomorrow. But again, I can assure you, in the effort of transparency, as this president always does, you will hear from him or one of us directly after that phone call tomorrow. Reagan.
Thank you, Karoline. There's a lot of focus on the judicial branch right now. The president has about 40 judicial appointments that he could make at this moment. Do you have an update on what the timeline would look like for those judicial appointments? And does the president have a list of potential nominees that he's vetting?
I do not have an update on a timeline, nor do I have a list, but I can certainly have our team gather that for you and provide it. You're welcome. Sure. Go ahead. Sure.
Thank you, Caroline.
Go
So
ahead.
the president is visiting the Kennedy Center this afternoon to
He
attend
is.
a board meeting. A question about what happened a few weeks ago. The Kennedy Center got bomb threats targeting a performance by Shingyun Performing Arts, which is an American company showcasing China before communism. This company has been targeted, unfortunately, by the CCP for years. I'm wondering if this administration has a response to this, and also as the president is putting an emphasis on arts and culture, what's the administration's message to potentially foreign state actors who are trying to disrupt that in the U.S.?
Don't disrupt it. This administration will take that very seriously and hold you accountable. We obviously condemn any violence or threats of violence against American institutions. And the president will be traveling to the Kennedy Center later this afternoon. I look forward to going with him. As you know, he is now the chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center, where he hopes to restore arts and culture that embrace American tradition, don't disparage it, as we have unfortunately seen over the past several years. The president will be doing a tour of the center. In his business developer mind, I'm sure he will make some recommendations on how the center itself can be improved, but also we'll be discussing perhaps some future plays and musicals and theatrical programs that the center will be hosting under his new leadership and the board's new leadership. Daniel.
Will the president be discussing with Putin tomorrow the future of Volodymyr Zelensky? Sort of a follow-up to John's question.
Again, I've been asked and answered this question now. I'm not going to get ahead of the president's discussion tomorrow, but after the phone call takes place, I can certainly provide a readout. Daniel.
Caroline, thank you so much. You mentioned earlier in the briefing that you guys are at the 10-yard line of peace. Given the amount of progress that you've made in such a short amount of time, is that an indictment of the previous administration's foreign policy stance, and is it just more proof that you need to talk to people to sort of get things done?
I think so. I think the previous administration is the reason this war began. As President Trump often says, this war would have never started if he were still in office. It only started because of the incompetence and the weakness of the previous administration. And President Trump is very proud of the progress that he and his team have made in such a short amount of time. And hopefully tomorrow that progress will move forward. Sure.
Thanks. There have been some media reports just in the last few hours that the administration has decided to withdraw from the International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine, which is designed to hold Putin accountable for war crimes. Are you able to confirm that? And if that has occurred, why has that occurred?
I'm not able to confirm it because I have not heard that. I will caution, I know there have been many inaccurate and misleading reports from Reuters lately, so I would caution anybody taking that seriously, but I can check in and get back to you. Rachel.
Thanks, Caroline. Is it the president's belief that the Justice Department should be investigating members of the January 6th Select Committee? Is he directing the DOJ to do that?
As the president made it very clear in his address on Friday, I believe some of you were there, I was there, he made his vision for what he would like to see of the Department of Justice very clear, but he said that he has appointed great people in Attorney General Pam Bondi and also in our FBI Director Kash Patel to do what they think is best for our justice system and to stop the weaponization of justice that we saw under the previous administration against not just President Trump but his supporters as well. We want to restore the Department of Justice to an institution that focuses on fighting law and order and crime and putting real criminals behind bars, not targeting Americans because of their religion or their political speech. We saw that under the previous administration, and it's unacceptable to this president.
And just to follow up really quickly on just Homan's comments from earlier, a few weeks ago in the Oval Office, the president said he will always abide by the courts. We heard what Tom Homan said earlier today. So I'm only asking just to be clear, for the American people. It is the administration's belief that that you feel like you are bound to comply by the judge's orders?
We are complying with the judge's orders.
Question on the storm.
Sure.
What role does the president see for FEMA with these storms? He's talking about getting rid of FEMA, states handling their own disasters. Does he plan to change how the federal government responds to these storms?
There hasn't been a change yet. That doesn't mean there couldn't be in the future. But as of right now, the president, the entire administration are actively monitoring the storms, as I said. In fact, before I came down here, there was an email note in my inbox from the Department of Homeland Security on what they are actually doing state by state across the board. So rest assured, Secretary Noem and her team is on it, and I would defer you to the Department of Homeland Security for any further details.
One more question. The president referenced power plants with a conversation with Vladimir Putin. What is he referring to with power plants? What is that?
There's a power plant that is on the border of Russia and Ukraine that was up for discussion with the Ukrainians, and he will address it in his call with Putin tomorrow.
The nuclear plant.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Caroline?
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you if you would be releasing more granular data about the people who were sent to El Salvador this week. Particularly, will you be releasing their names?
I don't believe so because of the privacy concerns at this point in time. That doesn't mean we won't eventually. I would defer you to the Department of Homeland Security for more details on the individuals on the flights, but we have been incredibly transparent in giving you the breakdown of the numbers and also some of the crimes committed by these heinous criminals and individuals: kidnapping, sexual abuse of a child, robbery, aggravated assault on a police officer. I would remind everybody in this room that Tren de Aragua is a foreign terrorist organization operating within the United States of America because the previous administration allowed them to invade our country. These are monsters who tortured, raped, and murdered a 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungre. They murdered 22-year-old nursing student Laken Riley. They led a multi-state sex trafficking operation involving smuggling women into the United States, holding them in stash houses in Louisiana, Florida, New Jersey, Texas, and Virginia, and forcing them into prostitution. They kidnapped and murdered a 33-year-old woman in Texas. They sexually and physically assaulted a woman and her daughter in Wisconsin. They conducted a mass shooting in Illinois. They peddled untraceable ghost guns across New York City, took over an Aurora, Colorado apartment complex where they kidnapped and tortured victims. And by the way, many of you in the mainstream media said that didn't happen. It turned out that it did. And because of the effective immigration policies of this administration, those foreign terrorists were detained and they are no longer operating on American soil, and we have President Trump to thank for that. We'll see you guys later at the Kennedy Center. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Caroline.